Right. So we are meeting virtually today for our political podcast on the 2024 presidential election. Last night, September 10th, we had the first debate and maybe only debate between Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and Republican candidate Donald Trump. And so the three of us are going to kind of dissect it and provide some of our overviews and reactions to the debate last night on this 23rd anniversary of September 11, 2001, on that terrorist attack. So thanks for joining me, Merri and Deron. And Deron, I don't remember if you drew the heads or tails to go first or if you wanted to go last, but
All right.
I'll give you the choice.
Okay. I'll go first. And yeah, I had a lot of notes written down, and it was an interesting debate to say the least, because what we're really talking about are two visions of what the country is all about. One, as Kamala Harris talked about, it's a difference between looking back and looking ahead. And there were a lot of things that came out in this debate where it just seemed like Donald Trump was focused on the past and holding on to his past, and Kamala Harris was interested in moving forward and, and creating a new vision for the country. You could say that neither one of them really talked about policy very much. However, I think what was supposed to happen from this debate happened, where there was going to be an identification, that clear delineation between Donald Trump and who Kamala Harris was. And you could actually see that by the things that were brought up, and how Kamala Harris baited and triggered Donald Trump into playing her game, and playing it like really poorly, but actually playing into what she wanted to do, and did very well at it. It was the same old Donald Trump from the Biden debate. It was the same old Donald Trump from the Biden and Hillary Clinton debates of past. That hasn't changed. And yet, at the end of the day, there was a CNN snap poll that was done where 63% said that Kamala Harris won the debate. When most of the pundits and most people who were watching this, they probably would question where what that other 30% was actually watching.
Like, the baiting part stood out to me as well, Deron. I planned on talking about as well.
Yeah.
And I've read a few different overviews of undecided voters, swing voters, and I've seen similar numbers in terms of who won the debate. So, Merri, what did you think?
I definitely echo what both of you just said, and Deron, the idea of like, it seemed like it was the strategy from the get-go was to kind of goad him, and it seemed like in the beginning he was trying to stick to his script. Like his advisors had said to him, don't do this, don't do that, stick to what talking about policy, stick to talking about immigration, because he seemed to pivot to that like every 5 minutes. But then he got on the whole thing with the dogs, locking up your pets because Haitian immigrants are going to come murder your pets. And I have to say, I actually kind of liked. I've had my criticisms of mainstream media the past few years for a variety of reasons, but I think that David Muir, and I'm drawing a blank, Lindsay, for her last name, the other journalist with him. I think the two of them did a great job, actually. I like that they fact checked him a little bit. They did some fact checking, but it was not obnoxious. It was not disruptive to the flow of it. They basically just said, no, it's actually, there's no evidence to suggest that Haitian immigrants are in fact eating people's dogs and cats. Let's move on, right? That kind of thing. So I think they did a great job with that, which I was surprised. It's always a tough one, right? CNN last time around didn't do any fact checking whatsoever, but I think that this was in my views, it's necessary. The idea that you still have 63%, only 63% who said that she won that debate, I think is just a bit of again, this sort of cognitive dissonance. What are we're hearing something, you kind of wonder what the other person is seeing. Are we not watching the exact same thing? I would say I'm normally personally not a person that loves debates, and I don't love watching them. because I think a lot of it's just sort of political theater, and that just sort of turns me off. But I think this was a pretty consequential one because I think that so many Americans were tuning in to see how it was going to go. And in terms of her strategy, I think she kind of nailed it in terms of what her advisors would want her to do. In terms of the policy, I'm kind of curious what you all think. I mean, there was discussion of some policy, but I think that part of the problem is how wonky do you want to get in one of these things? How deep in the policies do you really want to go? Because then people get sucked into the details and you're not paying attention to really. There's so much more else to look at, right? Maybe if we were just listening to them and not watching them, it'd be a different story. So I think overall it was interesting. I really liked her answer on abortion. I thought that was a great answer. The idea that women have been sitting in parking lots and bleeding in their cars because they're afraid to go into the emergency room. The emergency room doctors are afraid to give them care because of being arrested. So I think that was all great. And I also like the line that she said that I'm not Joe Biden, and I'm Kamala Harris. So I think she did a good job of sort of defining herself. So yes, it was interesting TV viewing last night.
Yeah, it really was. I meant to kind of lead this off that apparently there was 60 million viewers, 20%, 28% more than the Biden Trump debate. And, I think more modern data analysis have showed that like maybe the debates don't really matter. Typically debates are happening a little bit later, September and October. And, the last debate that we had with Biden and Trump, it really did matter. It arguably ended the Biden campaign. So, similar to Deron, I agree with a lot of your takes. I have a lot of notes, but it's hard, I won't go through all of them, at least initially, but I had kind of a similar take that I think when the debate started, um, I think Harris started and she seemed a little nervous in her opening remarks. She really didn't answer the question of whether people are better off economically than they were 4 years ago. She seemed to have a question that she wanted to answer and not the question that she was asked. And, she seemed a little nervous. And I think to your point, Mary, Trump seemed that his first response was one of his better ones, at least initially, about inflation. And then he started getting into inserting migration like he typically does. But to your point, Mary, too, about the way, and Deron hit on this too, but the way that, he kind of, that Harris told him in multiple ways of kind of setting him up. I noticed at least 5 times where she did that. But the one that really stood out to me, and if you watch the debate in its entirety, it's around the 24-minute mark. But it was the one where she started talking about crowd sizes. People started leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom, she said. She actually invited people to, watch or attend his rally and say, you won't hear him talk about your needs. And so then the moderator asked Trump his stance on the border bill that apparently had been tanked in part because of his pressure of Republicans in the House and Senate. And this is a topic that should be in his wheelhouse. I think immigration is something that's important to a lot of Americans, and to those who it's most important to tend to kind of favor Trump's policies over Democrats. And he couldn't resist. He had to go right back to the crowd sizes in talking about insisting how people don't leave his rallies. And so she was able to get into his head and get him off his game and belittle him. And there's just so many examples of that where she said that he was fired by 81 million people. She talked about how he could be manipulated by foreign leaders with flattery and favors. And that's why, and she also talked about how people in the military who have worked with him called him a disgrace, and I think it was almost, it was like a psychology class. She just really was trying to get into his head and push his buttons. And especially towards the end of her responses, knowing that he couldn't resist that debate. He couldn't resist the bait, and he seemingly went for it almost every time. So, and again, a lot of other things I could talk about, but I think those were at least the way that she was able to kind of bait him into getting him off his game seemed to be one of the big takeaways that I had to start off with.
So do we talk about the pets now, or what do we do?
Well, thank you. I was trying to keep mine short because I was gonna, but that one in particular, and that's a good segue, Darren, because that was the one that led him to, that's what led him to the migrants are eating pets in Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah.
That was the last comments that she made was about the crowd sizes that led into him going on a rant about pets, which I know you two were watching it real time last night. I was about an hour behind, and I had checked my phone and I saw a text about eating pets, and I couldn't believe it. And sure enough, that was part of the debate. So yeah, go ahead, talk about
there were other things too where she trolled him. She mentioned, I had all of this written down. She mentioned that about the economic plan that that Donald Trump had come up with using economists from the Wharton School, knowing full well that he went to the Wharton School. She also said something about, let's see, that he said that the Democrats have the plan of killing babies after they are born, which was shot down by David Muir. He mentioned the eating the pets, which was shot down by David Muir. But he also said this other part too, where they talked about criminal records or the crime numbers. And he was talking about migrant crime. And then he was talking about crime in general. They came back and said, well, the FBI has said this, that violent crime is down. And he came back and said, those numbers are fraudulent. So you know what his stance is about the criminal justice process and about how the government works when it's not in his favor. He cozied up to Viktor Orban from Hungary. Out of all of the people to say, look, we have a leader from Hungary who says I'm a good man. He chooses a person who is a strong man as his comparable. And also too, Harris mentioned at one point about temperament and her opponent being confused. And it's the same type of response that was being thrown at Joe Biden when he was running, that he's a confused old man. There were many. Oh, and one other thing too that really threw me off. He was asked twice if he would be in favor of hoping that Ukraine would win the war against Russia, and his response was, "I want this war to stop." So, and not to mention race and other things that were thrown up. I mean, to go back to what I said before, the question is, who won the debate? 63% said Harris. The other 37% are looking at it saying that Trump won, but nobody is basically asking that 37, I don't care who you're voting for. Who won the debate?
Right.
I have voted for tons of candidates, and many of them have never won. And they've gone to the debate, and I've said, man, my candidate tanked it. Okay. Right. I'm still going to vote for my candidate, but my candidate just blew it. It doesn't change my philosophy. It doesn't change my ideology. All of this stuff that was said, it paints the picture of who this man is and what he intends to do in the next 4 years if he's reelected into office. I mean,
right.
Harris called him out on everything. And even David Muir called him out about Ukraine twice. And he still said, like I said, I want this war to end.
And he had an opportunity with the Afghanistan withdrawal, as a way to kind of hit them, right? To hit both Biden and Harris. And on today's 9/11, right? And the idea that she was able to even turn that one around on him and talk about how he invited the Taliban to Camp David
and that he said,
summit.
And that he said,
he defended it.
He said that I brought him to Camp David and I talked to this man, Abdul. And I said, Abdul, don't do those things. I mean, and it turned out there was no man, Abdul.
He showed him a picture of his house based on that, in other words, drones would know where to find his house. Yeah, there were some crazy ones out there, and is still not able to admit that he lost. And again, I feel like this is just so trite. We're saying these things like, but the outrage just seems to it's just endless. Giving him the opportunity by acknowledging the fact that in the past couple of weeks he has actually said himself several times in different interviews that basically he fell short and whatever. But immediately, of course, he couldn't just say yes. I lost the election. He had to say no, that's not what I meant, and my words were twisted, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, not only did he mention Viktor Orban, but I like that he lumped in. It was like Viktor Orban, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham, and I think a few others too. It was a very strange pairing of people. But
Well, that was the fact checking he used. He validated what he said by it was the
Ask them.
Charlottesville that that quote he had about very fine people, and that go ahead and ask Laura and Sean, and I forget the other person from Fox News, but like that they're somehow the objective fact checkers out there.
Right.
Sorry to interject, but had to get that in.
And also even the fact that when the race question was brought up, the idea of race that she mentioned the Central Park Five. It was the group of young men who were accused of raping a woman, and talking about the fact that he took out a full page ad in the New York Times and called for their execution. And it just didn't seem to, again, this idea that what is the measure, Deron, that you said about ranking who kind of won a debate? I mean, again, though, I'm just curious what both of you think, though, too. It just seems like do people actually, they say they want to hear policy, but do people actually want to hear policy? I think there are a few who do, but I think most don't. I think most don't care.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I think that we had talked a lot about last time with Biden that, when he would say number one and number two and get into facts and figures and a bunch of details, that's really not what most Americans are looking for. And it's certainly not his skill set in being able to speak that way anymore. And so I share that point, Merri. I also wanted to point out a couple other things that you just raised. I definitely want us to talk about fact checking at some point. A quick non sequitur that I forgot to mention earlier. Just at the very beginning of Kamala coming out and walking over to the lectern, and Trump kind of walking around to the back, and that was kind of the alpha move that she was making, and she announced herself, introduced herself, and how to pronounce her name, and maybe in a way for him, and I could be wrong, but I don't remember him ever calling her by name or vice president. He didn't really seemingly look over there.
He doesn't seem to look at her.
Right. No, and the split screen was just really dramatic. There's that old kind of framework of, who won the debate will turn the volume down, and that split screen if you just look at the body language. And I think we said all of this with Biden, right? Biden lost that first debate, not necessarily because Trump was amazing, but because of how bad Biden was, and part of it was that split screen and the way that they contrasted with one another. So that body language really stood out to me throughout, and the way that she looked over at him, and kind of the facial expressions that she had as he was saying things. But I think one of the two other big points I really wanted to make sure I touched on, you just raised, Merri, is that the 2020 election. He was asked if he would acknowledge that he lost, and he said, "No, I don't acknowledge that at all." And again, kind of doubled, tripled down, or however many times he's done this now, that he still won the election, despite the moderators pointing out his own quotes recently. And then January 6th, he didn't directly answer a question about whether he had any regrets about his actions on January 6th. He said that he had nothing to do with it, other than they asked me to give a speech. And so, I can't say that I'm surprised, but, but in my opinion, and this has nothing to do with him being a Republican or anything else, it's just those should be disqualifying. He lost the 2020 election. his role in January 6th was more than just giving a speech. And yeah, those are just a few points that I really wanted to make sure we got to, and also the fact checking. But I'll turn it back over, there, and Merri, see what you think.
The question was asked about Trump making the comment that he had lost by a whisker. And his response was, I said that. And then the other thing that about January 6th, he basically, like Kevin, you said that he had nothing to do with that. And, I think the question was asked twice if he regretted anything that happened that day and did not give a response to it. And that question came before the one about the election of 2020. So, even if you feel that the questions aren't, let's say, aren't fair, and why are we rehashing these things? Donald Trump is bringing them up in rallies, that if he gets elected, the people who were convicted on January 6th, they're all going to be exonerated. They're all going to get pardons. And he's still saying that the election, the election was, it was fraudulent, things like that. They're being brought up in these debates because he continues to talk about them as if they're the only issues that are on his mind. And I think when you really pay attention to the debate as a whole and the way this campaign is going, there's a rehashing of the past and there's a moving forward. And Merri, you brought it up too. At one point, he was bringing up Joe Biden, and he was talking about Joe Biden sleeping until 4 o'clock or waking him up from his nap. And, I still believe until yesterday that he still wanted Joe Biden to be the person he was running against. And I had it written down, and Kevin, you mentioned this immediately when Joe Biden debated Donald Trump, my reaction was he's going to lose this debate just by the way he walked onto the stage. And immediately you knew that Biden was going to lose. And like you said, Kevin, the split screen, he had his mouth wide open. He, was kind of like staring. The point when I figured that Donald Trump was going to lose this debate is as soon as she walked up to him and shook his hand. She had that room, cornered. She had him cornered at that point.
Definitely like a sense
I
of
agree.
command, a presence, right? A presidential presence. And then even the comment, and probably you both have it written down. I just wrote down healthcare, but the part where he was saying about replacing Obamacare, and what was the comment he made about that basically
Yes,
he'll
concepts
think
of
of
a plan.
something. Yeah, I'll come
Yes,
some
concepts of a plan.
concepts of a plan. Right. Yeah, parts of a plan. Yeah, I thought that to be fascinating. She did answer some questions, and again, it's interesting how you read journalists take on things either while it's going on or after. The idea of her response being non-committal, like on fracking, but she came out and said repeatedly, I'm not gonna ban fracking. But again, this pivot towards the future, as Deron mentioned, the idea that, okay, how long are we going to keep having these exhausted conversations about, the idea of gas, and start moving on to these renewable energies, like as a nation? I mean, it just seems like we're, again, like living in 1955 with our big, huge V8, engines, that we need to move forward. So I think that was a good way to kind of bridge those two by saying, yeah, I'm not going to ban fracking at this point, but we need to be putting our attention towards the future, towards renewable energies. Yeah, and immediately, yeah, again, Deron, to your point about the confidence, if you're really confident, you're just going to kind of walk off the stage and go do your thing. He went out afterwards, I think, onto like in the sort of spin room on Fox News to talk about how well he did, and that this is the best debate he ever had, and it's kind of mind boggling. But
The healthcare part, Merri, that you just raised, it, just to frame it, 2010, the Affordable Care Act passed. There's been over 60 attempts to repeal it. And he talked a lot about repealing it, repeal and replace in 2016. So for those keeping track, Trump this is his third time running for president. And yet in 2024, there's still only concepts of a plan. If you were to repeal it, what would take its place? It's been a law for 12 years, and he's been running for president for 9 years over 3 election cycles. So it's 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 not serious to just say you have concepts of a plan.
And
I wonder,
he defined the ACA as lousy and stupid.
right, right,
And
and
that was before the thing where he said, uh, I have concepts of a plan. So the best thing that he could say is that the ACA is lousy and stupid. And I've read many people saying that it was really keen of Kamala Harris mentioning John McCain's name.
yeah, I mean, she she mentioned a lot of, she did a lot of name dropping, and again, it's a little unique to have um, the Cheneys. She mentioned the Cheneys endorsing her, and 200 Republicans and people who had served in his administration, and that was an interesting exchange too. I think there's part of me who thought that was a pretty strong response when he had mentioned, well, I fired a bunch of people in my administration, unlike Democrats who let people who do a lousy job stay in their job. But it's unique, and we could go back to the Republican convention. It's unique that that they were really without former presidents and vice presidential candidates, very limited. I'm trying to think if there was one there, in modern, the last couple of decades who attended the Republican convention, where, of course, for Democrats, it was essentially all of them, other than Carter, who is physically unable to be there. I wondered what you thought about the fact checking. That it one sign that maybe you didn't win a debate is when you start targeting the refs, so to speak. When you lose a game and you say it was the refs' fault. So apparently now it was ABC. They were in the tank for Harris, and the moderators were picking on him and that kind of thing. So um, I wondered, one of the takeaways that I had, apparently from Daniel Dale, who does a lot of fact checking, and I believe he's employed by, at least in part, by CNN. So, that's a little disclosure, but he recorded 33 false statements by Donald Trump, and one for Kamala Harris. Now, Kamala Harris had many others that were misleading or needed context. I think that she had a lot of those, but the point being is when you have a disparity in false statements, especially ones that are egregiously false, back to Mary's point, like part of the role of the media as a moderator is to set the record straight, that it isn't an abortion anymore when if a baby is killed after it's been delivered. I mean, that's not an abortion. Abortion terminates a pregnancy. So that's murder. And so no state allows that. Like, just being able to call that out, I think, is important context for the viewers. But without me saying anything more about that, I kind of wondered what you two thought about the fact checking that was happening by the moderators compared to the first debate between Biden and Trump.
Oh, you can go.
I think it's kind of necessary, but I don't think it's, again, I kind of go back to the point that I made, the first thing I had written down about this idea of how consequential are these debates to begin with, because it doesn't matter even if they're offering facts. The people that are going to want to believe them are going to believe them, and those who don't want to listen to them are just going to say that he was set up. But I think it was good for maybe those few people that are still on the fence that are listening. And I still question the idea of how many people are undecided when they're being interviewed, whether it's by CNN or by Fox or by ABC or whatever. I think it's still necessary, though, to provide them, because when you have such blatant falsehoods being hurled out, I think there's got to be some kind of pushback. Otherwise, like, what is the point? Like, I mean, I don't mean to get super philosophical. What is truth then? If there's no truth, if we could just say whatever we want, whenever we want, I mean, where are we going? That's a major problem. So ultimately, I would say that I think the fact checking was necessary. I liked it compared to the first one and the chaos of the first one. And I think that the takeaways that I think about are just the idea that she appeared presidential. So regardless of what was really said or not said, I don't think that most people really pay attention to it that much. I think it's the fact that the presence was there. And I think if she'd said some blatant falsehoods, they would have corrected her too. But misleading, obfuscating a little bit is a little bit different than, pets are being eaten by immigrants, by illegal immigrants, which he went back to again and again and again, the illegal immigration thing.
The you know, if you're going to do the fact checking, you better be on it right away. And with the CNN debate between Trump and Biden, there was no fact checking whatsoever. And what happens afterwards, nobody really cares. They have already made up their mind. So I noticed the big difference between the CNN and the ABC debate when David Muir or Lindsay Davis would say immediately, a baby being born and that's murder. That's not abortion. No state allows that. Or the other one that was there were a few of them where they called him out on certain things. That didn't happen the first time around, and it felt like he was getting away with scot-free with some of the not even misleading, just like out and out blatant stories that he was telling. So if you're going to have this idea of having fact checking, you got to do it immediately. It can't be that we're going to do it for the Monday morning quarterback type of thing afterwards. It's got to be like right away.
And Trump was able to speak for just 5.5, 6 minutes longer, total time spoken during the debate. He was over 43 minutes and she was at 37 minutes and some change. And the reason I bring that up is I think there was many times. So he had many opportunities to maybe say what he wanted to say, and maybe fact check Kamala if he thought that was necessary. But the reason I was bringing this up is that they were muted, and he was talking a lot while he was muted, and they unmuted him to allow him to talk even when it wasn't his turn, or to give him extra time. And so, you can't really have it both ways. I mean, if they were really following the rules, like the first debate between Biden and Trump, they wouldn't have unmuted him during all those times where he was talking. So another, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
No. Mine was.
Finish your thought first. Sorry.
But it's a different topic.
Oh, I was just going to say that along that same, the way that the fact checking done, I think I said this earlier, was done well though. It wasn't like they were, stop. That was incorrect. It was more like, okay, well, that's actually not correct. Moving on, Vice President Harris, blah, blah, blah. Like, it was done in a very seamless, kind of fluid way. And I think that worked.
Right.
That is, I think, a much more effective way of fact checking. So I was impressed with how they did it. Because I remember David Muir interviewing Trump while he was president and just being like, oh my God, he just was kind of railroaded. Trump just talked over them the entire time and he couldn't get his points in. This time, I think they were very disciplined, and they had, as Deron said before, they had their facts ready to go. But it was just quick.
Because the things that he was saying, that Trump was saying, he's been mentioning these things on the campaign trail for months. So you had to come prepared that he's probably going to say something about pets. He's going to say something about, bad people running Aurora, Colorado. He's going to say all of these things that you have to be prepared that, giving birth to somebody and then killing the baby is murder. It's not abortion. That's murder. And no state has a law that says you could do that. So they were already prepared for some of the things that he was going to say because he's been saying it for months.
Right. I wanted to talk about Mary's point. Does it matter? Does the debate matter? And I fully, agree that there are so many people locked in. They're going to vote for Harris, they're going to vote for Trump, or they're not going to vote at all. They're going to vote for a third party candidate. And I do, future episode, we are going to look at how many people are actually undecided and what those demographics of people who are undecided and so forth. So we'll save that for another day. But I do, and we'll also save for another day how close this election is going to be. But I think it's worth pointing out that an election that's probably going to be decided by a few thousand votes in a few states, that a debate like this, where you're winning 6 out of 10 voters who watch it, who are undecided, could be one of many things that swing this election. So I just want to say, I don't want to minimize the importance of the debate last night. And it's hard to disentangle all the ways that we're gonna, who wins the election and why, to say that this is the exact reason that, it may help Harris win, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And we've talked about the momentum, the fundraising. The fundraising just in the last 2 days has been, I think it was $45 million that Act Blue got yesterday. They were on track for another 30 million plus today. Just a lot of momentum on Harris's side. And, there was a endorsement by Taylor Swift last night too. And apparently there's been 300,000 plus people who have visited the URL that she shared on Instagram when she endorsed Harris. So who knows how many of those people who have actually registered. But again, we're talking about really close election where 43,000 votes decided that Biden was president instead of Trump.
And look at the feeling that people have, let's say on the Democratic side, after this debate, as opposed to how they felt after the Joe Biden debate. Completely different. Completely different. So when we talk about this momentum, and we mentioned it before, that probably after the conventions, all the numbers are going to flatten out again, and they did. But you still see this different type of feeling that's out there where perhaps Democratic voters are walking away saying, this is going to work out all right for us if we just go out and vote in November and not do what we did when Hillary Clinton ran, where we thought she had it in the bag.
And going back to the topic, Kevin, again about the consequence or the importance of these debates. I mean, I was just thinking what popped in my head was, Deron, you'll appreciate this. Back in 1858, when Abe Lincoln and Stephen Douglas were running against one another for the Senate seat in Illinois, and they debated one another for 7 different times in Illinois throughout the fall, actually, of that year, they'd spend 30 to 40 minutes on one question, right? Just one question. And people would sit there wrapped for hours listening to what they were saying. And now you get maybe 1 minute, 2 minutes to make your point. And these are usually are issues that are lengthy, that are substantial, that require some patience to listen to them, that require some depth. How much depth can you actually really get? I think that's one of the reasons why I just don't, debates just aggravate me, because there's really not an opportunity to get in depth on these questions. And it feels like just very much like political theater. So I think but perhaps, I mean, I think the last few, I will say, have been a little bit better. I think that one thing we could say is that's positive in the age of Trump that's come along. I think that there's been an opportunity more for a little bit more back and forth and follow up on some questions. So I mean, maybe that's one good thing to come out of it, but it sure is a far cry from the 30 minutes on one question that each candidate would get back in the day. When it was already decided, right? We already knew that Douglas would win that state.
Well, some of the material for campaign advertisements will probably be generated from the debate last night. And not to say that campaign advertisements are necessarily going to move the needle significantly either, but some of those ads kind of write themselves of, I have a concept of a plan, or some of the other references that we've made with pets and so forth. So with a few minutes left, maybe just kind of final thoughts for each of us, and I'll start. One of the concerns that I have going forward is the desperation, perhaps. Trump lost the debate, and he lost the debate to Harris, and I think how he goes forward now will be interesting. I wouldn't be surprised if he shook up his the headlines, that change the narrative, maybe focuses on voter suppression. But I think he's going to need to do something to where the focus is on how he lost the debate to a biracial female, and how he was belittled by her in multiple ways over the course of that hour and a half last night. And just also there's kind of the darkness of this rhetoric about the country being lost. and we're a failing nation, and we're going to end up in World War III. And it seems like when he was triggered last night, he goes dark. And so I don't know if there's data that he has, or arguments that people have made to him that's persuasive to people, but that's something that I find a little concerning, just to kind of how this this campaign's going to be run over the last 50 some days, and then of course what happens after the election day. Um, this is a person who claimed the 2012 election was rigged and stolen, and that we should march on Washington again in 2012, when Barack Obama dominated Romney, and then refused to admit that he lost the popular vote in 2016, and we've talked about 2020. So, just a little bit of weariness I have if Trump loses 2024.
You reminded me, because I'm glad you said that comment, because I just come across the Alan Lichtman prediction. He's the professor that has this, that was the 12 markers, and he's predicted that Kamala Harris is going to win. But I think you're absolutely right, Kevin, that even whether she wins or not, I think we're all going to lose, because I shudder to think the desperation that with the idea that these looming sentencing, that the one sentence hearing was postponed until after the election. So obviously, if he loses, that's where he's headed, and probably to a jail sentence. And so I shudder as well. I think that I hate to be negative like this guy, but I think we're all going to lose in some way. But I would go back to the last statement that I said before about, in terms of just the debate, bringing it to a close. I don't really think the substance of what was said matters. I mean, I think the zingers about Hannibal Lecter and whatever were great, but ultimately it was, I think, the perception that people have walking away of the person. And so I think that even if it's 1 to 2 points, like you said, 1 to 2 points can move the needle, can make a huge difference all the way around. So I'm optimistic, and yet I'm also scared at the same time.
All right, I'm going to go in a different route really fast. I'm looking forward to October 1st. That's the debate between Tim Walz and J.D. Vance. The reason why I bring that up is because the question was about abortion, and ABC asked the question, J.D. Vance, or made the comment, J.D. Vance said you would veto a ban. And Trump's response was, I don't talk to J.D. Vance. So I'm looking forward to hearing what the vice presidential candidates have to say. It's probably not going to change the needle on either side, but I'm sure it will be very entertaining.
Yeah, well said. And I think JD is probably going to feel like he's got to, show his worth. And so he's going to, um, he's going to be engaged. I'll just put it that way. So thank you again. And we look forward to our next discussion next time.
Thanks,
Bye,
guys.
everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.